Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters. Welcome to today's program. On today's program, we're going to be discussing a very interesting topic. And this topic is the greater sins. Now, what are the greater sins? The greater sins, there's a book called The Greater Sins. And in this book, it goes over multiple sins that, if committed, are worth more than regular sins. Something extra has to be done. That's how bad these sins are. And before we get into those sins, first we have to understand the concept of what it means to sin, what is required, what isn't required, before we can truly understand what the greater sins are and we can understand how to avoid them and if we're in fact committing them ourselves. Now, we're going to be talking today about taqwa. Now, the word taqwa is derived from the root word waqaya, which means to safeguard or to abstain. Now, at the end of the day, what do we know? Where does our knowledge come from? Our knowledge comes from the Imams and the Prophets and from the Holy Quran. So let's see what Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam, how he explains taqwa. Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam was asked to explain taqwa. He replied, "Submit to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do not go near the prohibited." Now notice here how he says, do not go near the prohibited. Now this is something that a lot of the times we sort of don't pay attention to this. Do not go near the prohibited. Now, there's certain things that we know are prohibited, but even if we know they're prohibited, if we still continue to associate with them, even if we're not doing these things ourselves, if we are still around it, we're still in that environment, over time what can happen is when you become used to something, that thing can start to physically affect you. Now, let's say the example, we know that pork is haram. Everyone knows pork is haram. I would say a good 99% of people, it's not something that has to be discussed. Pork is haram. Now, if you know pork is haram, but every single person you're around, your friends, your family, if they're all eating pork and you're hanging around them when they're eating it and everything, eventually you're going to start to see that it's okay. Now, maybe it'll take a little time. Maybe it's not going to be like overnight. It'll take some time for you to get used to it. So even being near it, even if you still understand yourself, even if you still understand it's haram, even if you don't eat it, you're putting yourself into that position and you're making it harder for yourself. Now that's the key thing. It's making it harder for yourself. There are certain things that we understand. We understand the difference between right or wrong, but you're making it harder for yourself. Now being around, for example, even if you're at a table or you're at a restaurant where they're serving alcohol, if there's alcohol at your table, if there's alcohol at your next table, even if you're not drinking it yourself, you're not physically drinking it, you know it's haram, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam says do not go near the prohibited. So even in something like that, it's not just, taqwa isn't just about refraining from wrong. It's about refraining from the entire concept of wrong, refraining from everything that has to do with it, and not putting yourself into these positions. Now, sometimes you can avoid it. Now, of course, that's a different topic of discussion, what you can't avoid. But what you can avoid, you have to do that right away. The things that you can avoid, the things that you can do to make it easier on yourself, of course, that's the recommended thing to do. What Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam is telling us. Now, what this means, the main thing that we can see that this means is that one should strive to fulfill all of the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to abstain from those things that are strictly prohibited. Now, on the basis of this, what Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam has said, taqwa can be classified into two main types. Now, the first type of taqwa consists of compulsory obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in fulfilling the compulsory duties and not leaving even a single duty to be unperformed. Now, what are these duties? What are these duties that in fulfilling these, we can't even miss a single thing. We have to do this. This is called wajibat. Now, wajibat means something. It means the obligatory commands, which, if not carried out, invite the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, these are things such as namaz. 5 times a day, you're required to read your namaz by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires us to read our namaz. During the holy month of Ramzan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires us to fast for 30 days. Now, these are the wajibat. These are the things that we have to do. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very generous. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's very merciful on us. There are so many things that we do that Allah lets slide. And there's so many spots of things that we do that, for example, during Laylatul Qadr, you read a couple du'as in one night, you can change everything. On a Thursday night, you can change everything. On a Friday, reading salawat gives you so much sawab. And these are some of the things that we can do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us to give to the poor. He tells us to have good manners. He tells us all these things that at the end of the day help us. Now, it's the same thing with the wajib. Reading your namaz 5 times a day, fasting, these things help us. But unlike with reading salawat on Friday, which is something that you're not required to do, but that is a very good thing to do. It puts you many places ahead, and at the end of the day, it helps you in a positive way. The wajib are things that you have to do. Now, reading namaz, of course, it's a huge blessing to do. But if you don't do it, now, for example, when I wake up in the morning and I go to read Fajr, when I go to read Fajr, of course, people don't want to get up in the morning. Can be a difficult thing to do sometimes, but you're required to do that. Now, what happens if you don't do that? For example, let's say I have a chance to give to the poor, but I don't do it. Like, I see somebody on the side, or somebody I can help, but it's like I want to use this money for something else. I end up not doing it. Or for salawat on a Friday, I want to read a tasbih of salawat. I just distracted in other things. Unfortunately, I don't get to do it. So that's a missed opportunity. But what happens for the wajib? If in the morning for Fajr, I end up not waking up for Fajr, and I miss that time, I miss my Fajr prayer, I then have to make it up. That is a debt that I owe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because this is something that I was required to do. And I didn't do it. I didn't fulfill my duty. We are punished for it. This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like. It attracts the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if we don't do these things that we're required to do. Even missing Fajr and making up Fajr, even that, of course, we've already lost sawab, but that's something that you have to do. You have to make it up. The first part was the wajib. And after the wajib, we come to the mustahabat. Now, what's an example of the mustahab? Now, mustahab is, for example, the number one example that's always mentioned is namaz shab. Namaz shab is a very recommended prayer to read. You can read it after your evening prayers, and it's a very recommended namaz to read. The imams and the prophets have talked about it. It's gives great sawab. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who read it. It's a great tawfiq. Inshallah, we all have the tawfiq to be able to read it regularly and take advantage of that. But this isn't something that we're required to do. If I don't get up, let's say I want to read namaz shab 30 minutes before Fajr, and I end up not reading it. Unfortunately, that's a sad thing. You missed it, but you're not getting sin for it. It's like I said, it's a missed opportunity. There's some things that we have a chance to do, but unfortunately we miss that opportunity. It goes to somebody else, something else happens. And then there's the example of something that we have to do. We have to read our Fajr prayer. We have to, if there's a bill that you have to pay on time, and if you don't pay it on time, then something bad's going to happen. So you have to pay it on time. You're required to pay that on time. These are the recommended acts that if we perform them, the mustahab, we earn the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if we don't, we're not liable for punishment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's just like I said, something that unfortunately we didn't do this time. Inshallah, we have the tawfiq to be able to do it next time. Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam said, to refrain from eating even a single morsel of haram is near Allah more valued than the performance of 2,000 rakats of recommended salah. 2,000 rakats of recommended salah. Even refraining from a single morsel of food. So this is our main priority, especially for the mustahab. Before we can fully get the true value of mustahab, before we can get the sawab from it, we first have to refrain from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to do. And so, look, for example, okay, let's say I read the nafilas. Let's say I read nafila fajr, mustahab. Let's say I read nafila zuhur, nafila, let's just say 2. Let's say I read nafila fajr, 2, and then I read nafila isha, so that's 4. And let's say every day I'm reading 4. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter that you're doing this. This isn't something that you have to do. If when you disobey what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us to do. So for example, that haram morsel of food, you got it and that doesn't belong to you. Even a morsel of food, that's what it is. Even something tiny that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to have, is prohibited to have. It's more near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So refraining from doing that. So I have a chance to do something. I have a chance to, even from a little thing. I have a chance to take some food from somewhere. And I don't do that. I have the chance to commit a sin and I don't do that. You're following the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not sort of the system. You have to do what you have to do first. We don't want to fall in line of doing the makeup system, which is, it's not sort of a trade, which is, okay, I'm going to do this. So if I read, my mustahab, but I miss some of my, I have to do my fasting. I'm not saying Ramzan, yet you're required to fast all of the days in Ramzan. So I'm going to only fast 10 days. But in the other, let's say 20 days, in those days, I'm going to be reading, I'll try to read as many nafilas as I can. It doesn't work like that. There's things that that is a requirement. Fasting is a requirement. And so, just like that, if we're able to refrain from doing something that we're not supposed to do, even a single morsel of haram food, a single morsel, even, for example, something we're not sure about, something, is this haram, is this not haram, even refraining from that, even if you're not sure, has a great sawab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam has also said, to forego a single dirham of prohibited money is equal near Allah to 70 accepted hajjs. 70 accepted hajj. Now, here we see the priority. 2,000 rakat salah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would rather have you to not eat even a single morsel of haram. Then on the other side, even a single dirham. Let's say a single dollar. A single dollar. What can you do with a dollar? That's, a dollar is nothing at the end of the day. A dollar, you can, maybe the gumball machine at the mall. Or, you can, in theory, you can get a couple things with a dollar. But at the end of the day, it's not a big thing. You'll think of it as a small thing as well. Even, ill-gotten gains, if I can get a dollar some way that's not haram, and that's a small thing. A dollar isn't a big thing. You're thinking, hey, it's not, we're not talking about $20,000. We're not talking about making a haram living. We're talking about a single dollar, as Imam Jafar Sadiq said, a single dirham. But no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would rather have you stay away from that. And it's more near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than 70 accepted hajjs. Now, some of us, we haven't even been for hajj. You're required to go for hajj once in your lifetime. Some people haven't even went. I haven't went personally. And just imagine that if you go 70 times, what's the point? You go 70 times for Hajj. You'll get equal that sawab by just not getting haram money. If there's a chance that you can get something the wrong way, and instead you say, Qurbatan illallah, I'm not going to do that, it's equal to 70 Hajj. It's the same sawab. So this is the way that we should be thinking about things. The best way to do it is to just put it into that number sense. Just try to make sense in your mind. Okay, 70 Hajj compared to one haram dollar. One haram dollar. If I refrain from that, that's like 70 Hajj. Or what about the single morsel of haram food? Now, what is a single morsel? Let's say, for example, a crumb. You have a tiny piece of something. Now imagine going to, McDonald's or something in America and having a burger over there. Having a whole burger or a whole this, a whole that. And compare that to the single morsel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you refrain from that, it's more near to me than 2,000 rakats of mustahab salat. So that's just something to put into perspective for ourselves. Whenever we think about this, think about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to tell us. It's good to put it into perspective so we can have an understanding of just the cause and the effect. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do, how we get there, how we, just everything in our daily lives. These are, the main things. Now, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam continued. He said, strive more to perform good deeds. However, if you cannot perform a good act, at least do not disobey the commands of Allah. Because if one lays the foundation of a building and does not spoil it, then even if the progress is slow, the building will definitely rise. Conversely, the person who lays the foundation and at the same time spoils it, then it is sure that the walls of this building will never be raised. Now, this all has to do with the foundation of something. And this is the whole conversation we're having about the greater sins. Because in order to understand the greater sins, in order to be able to talk about, okay, these are the main things we have to avoid, before that, we have to understand why we should be avoiding. Not only because of the specific act and because of the specific punishment, but because it's obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's obeying the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When He says, stay away from bad, instead of, it's better to stay away from bad than to do good. If you have the chance to do everything, to feed the poor, to do this, to do that, but at the same time, you're doing something that's haram, you're doing it in a haram way, or you're doing something that's haram, you're not making any progress. When you're making a building, you have to have the strong foundation, and only there can the building actually be made. But if it's a weak foundation and then everything else is strong, what's the point? It's the same thing with the house. If you have the foundation of the house, it's weak, everything's cracking up, there's mold everywhere, and then the rest of the house is nice, something happens, what's going to happen? One problem happens, the house is going to come down. And this is the foundation that we have to have as Muslims ourselves, that before we get into everything else, of course it's good to do everything else. We want to be the best versions of ourselves we have to be, but that all starts where? It all starts with obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commands. It all starts with keeping ourselves away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like. Now, here we have this. We've been talking about many different things throughout this program. We've talked about taqwa. We've talked about basically what taqwa can be broken down into, the wajib and the mustahab. We talked about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He would rather have us staying away from the prohibited than doing good deeds. We even talked about what Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam has said, the amount. Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam has said, to refrain from eating even a single morsel of haram food is more near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than 2,000 rakats of mustahab salat. Now imagine, let's put this into perspective. I mean, 2,000 is it's a big number. I mean, a lot of us aren't even reading 2,000. So just imagine that, and then imagine a single piece of haram food. Or like the other example, the 70 Hajj. Who has went for 70 Hajj? 70, I mean, that is, whoever went for 70 Hajj, if somebody had the opportunity for that, I mean, alhamdulillah. And just like that, the same sawab can be given by refraining from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to do. Now, we also mentioned about the foundation. Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam has said about the foundation, that the foundation of a building, if it doesn't have a strong foundation, then the building, the progress, nothing's going to happen. Even if we start out slow. For example, instead of doing a bunch of good deeds at once and then trying to do everything, we start out by, okay, I'm going to refrain from this. I'm going to just focus on doing my wajib. As soon as my wajib is down, then I'm just going to focus on doing things that, staying away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want me to do. Just starting off the basics. And from there, even if it's something that's slow, we're not making a ton of progress at once, the building will still have a good foundation. The building will still be able to, rise. The building will be able to rise. But if it's the other way around, we have a weak foundation and then we do everything else and pile everything, that's not going to be making progress. The Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, for the person who recites Subhanallah, Allah plants a tree in paradise. On hearing this, a man from the Quraysh stood up and said, if it is this way, then there must be many trees for us in paradise. The Holy Prophet replied, yes, but you must be aware that you don't set fire from here to burn them all down. Now imagine, these were people at the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And at the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course they had the guidance of the Prophet right there. They can go, they could ask him a question. Now for us, we have that guidance through the way of the Quran, through the way of the Hadith from the Prophet himself, from our 12 Imams. But at the same time, when you look at this, we see that the things that we do, like I said about the system, and even putting into perspective, this puts even more into perspective. Staying away from one morsel of haram food, 2,000 rakat salah, 1 dirham of haram money, 70 hajj. And when we look at the numbers, we realize that we have to start making progress the right way. We don't want to waste our progress. If we're reading even our namaz, we're reading namaz ishab, we're doing everything that we have to do, and then at the same time, we're doing, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbids us to do on the other side, where's the progress? You go up one, you go down one. You go up one, you go down one. You go up one, you go down one. Basically you're going 2 steps forward, and then you're going 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And you're not making any progress. This is what I've seen recently. A while back I was watching some Pakistani dramas. What I saw from these was, whenever in some of them, when the story starts to develop, what happens is they go 2 steps forward and then they go 1 step back. And it sort of stays like this the whole way, where you're not really making any progress. And so when you look at this example, you look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, that reading salawat, reading all of these things are great things to do. But if there is that opportunity, that's where the test comes in. Because if we're reading our wajib, we're doing our mustahab, we're doing everything it's supposed to do. But then when that test comes for us to eat haram, the test comes for us that we're in an uncomfortable position to do something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't want us to do. When that test comes, we're not going to be ready for that test. We're going to fail that test. Why? Because our foundation isn't strong. If your foundation is strong, whatever test comes up, you'll be able to pass that test. And you'll be able to make progress. And in paradise, you won't be burning down those trees. Those trees will keep growing. Otherwise, you commit sins, and then every time, one tree, one tree, one tree. We're talking about a different place. We're talking about in paradise here. In paradise. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Subhanallah, subhanallah. Right there, there's 2 trees. Subhanallah, 3 trees. Now, one sin, you waste all your progress. So inshallah, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're able to maintain our progress. We're able to have an understanding of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do. And we're able to have that understanding of knowing what to stay away from, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to do. And this is how we see the greater sins. These are the sins that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 100% stay away from. Of course, we're supposed to stay away from all sins, but these particularly draw the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So inshallah, next time we will be talking about some of the greater sins, talking about how to stay away from them, talking about specifically getting into more detail about it. But today we had a discussion about taqwa, just setting the foundation basically. Setting that foundation. Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam said, have a strong foundation. So we have to understand why we have to stay away from it. We have to understand the differences here. The differences between, okay, if I read 2,000 rakats of salah, of mustahab salah, and then I have one morsel of haram food. We understand the differences here. We have a basic understanding of the foundation. Well, that's all the time we have left for today. Now we're going to do Allahumma kullu waliyaka for the safety and protection of our 12th Imam. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma kulli waliyaka al-hujjat ibn al-Hassan salawatuka alayhi wa ala abai fi hadhihi as-sa'a wa fi kulli sa'a waliyan wa hafidha وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وجه ورحم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Khuda Hafiz.